everybody. Thanks for tuning in for today's podcast. Today, what I want to talk about is this: God always keeps his promises. So I want to talk about the story of the wall of Jericho. And again, if you want to find more information about this story, you can find it primarily in Joshua chapter 6. But anyway, the wall of Jericho story is a great example of God keeping his promises. Just to kind of give you a little bit of a history here, is that this is the children of Israel. And obviously, the children of Israel were in captivity in Egypt. And God had made a promise that he would get them into Canaan, get them into their promised land. And so he grew up Moses and raised Moses and used Moses to lead the children of Israel out of Egypt. There were many signs and wonders as he brought them through that, and also brought them out with silver and gold. When they came out, they got to the Red Sea, and looked like all hope was lost and they were going to die, and God split the Red Sea and they crossed on dry land. There were times where it looked like they were going to starve to death or that they were going to die of thirst, and each time, whatever needed to happen so that God's promises stood happened. And let me just kind of say to you, what is it in your life that you're allowing to discourage you because it looks like there's no other way of how this thing is going to happen? I want to encourage you to reflect and meditate on the children of Israel. This is a great story. So obviously the children of Israel, they get out and, God delivered them time and time again, and they continue to turn their back on God. They continued to doubt God, and it got to the place where there were generations of them that didn't actually get to see the promised land as a result of that. But God had promised as a nation that he would set them free, and he was going to keep that promise. So here we pick up in Joshua chapter 6. After Moses dies, Joshua takes over, and you've got a people, and now here is the time finally where it's like, all right, it's harvest time. Let's get this going. And Jericho is this city that they have to get through in order to take their land of milk and honey. So in verse 1, it says, "Now Jericho was straitly shut up because of the children of Israel, and none went out." So Jericho had this impenetrable wall. It was this support system that made it almost impossible for them to be overrun. And I think it's important to note that here, even though the promise from God was that I will give you the land, and not only that I will give you the land, verse 2 says, "And the Lord said unto Joshua, See, I have given unto thine hand Jericho, and the king thereof, and the mighty men of valor." So here they're looking at something that was an impossible feat, something that in the natural you could look at and say, okay, God, why would you tell me that this is something that I can have, and all I can see is impossibilities? And I want to point out to you that even before they ever marched around this wall, even before these walls ever had fallen, God had already said to them, "See, I have already given it to you." How does that make sense? See what? See this big wall? See all these ways it can't be done? What does that mean? Well, I want to submit this to you. What that means is that sometimes when you get to the point where you're discouraged, when you get to the point where you're frustrated, that's really just a sign to tell you that you're looking at things with the wrong eyes. God never intends for you to live your life judging at things by what you see in the natural. God's ways are bigger than our ways, and his ways are higher than our ways. His thoughts are higher than our thoughts, and that means that his ways are better. And so sometimes you got to learn to put aside what you think you know, what you think you see, what you think you've heard, what other people has happened to them, what they said is possible and what they said was not possible, and put on the eyes of faith. Because once God speaks something over your life, it will come to pass if you cooperate with it. So if you keep reading, God gives them instructions, and he's telling them, hey, I've already given you this city. So he's saying to them, all I need you to do now is for 6 days, they were to walk around Jericho once a day. And then on the seventh day, once they got to the seventh day, they were supposed to walk around the wall 7 times. And, I really think this is interesting because there was a trust factor that they had to have in order to be able to heed and get into obedience with what God needed them to do. One of the things I think a lot of people miss it in this last day with God is that sometimes we just look at God as a genie in a bottle. Let me just give you my wishes and, you take care of it. No. But if you read in Philippians, it talks about that we are partners with God, which means that God operates in cooperation with us, which is what our part is to do. Jesus died to restore us back to fellowship with God, to restore us back to the original place that God created us. And that's in his image and his likeness. And that is us blessed. That is us living in dominion, not being defeated, not letting life run you over. You run over life. You determine what you will and will not allow in your life because of the grace and mercy that was provided to you because Jesus paid the price. But there is a cooperation that you have to do to be able to access what is yours. God made you in his image and his likeness. That means he made you in his class. The same way he was able to create is the same ability he's given you to create. So the children of Israel had a decision here. They had a decision to look at this thing and be like, this makes no sense. I mean, if I were to say to you, hey, I bought you a brand new house in Bloomfield Hills, here are the keys. And then I say to you, okay, but let me give you these instructions that you have to follow because there are people who already live there. Most of y'all would write me off as somebody crazy. But I want to point out to you here that even though God had given them a city and there were people there, he expected them to believe what he said and obey him. And because they obeyed him, and the funny thing about this story too is even when they were walking around the walls of Jericho as they were in obedience to God, you know, the instruction given to them was that they were to do that silently, which I thought was interesting. I thought, well, you know, why would that matter? They were supposed to take the journey silently. Why? Because I believe that there is value in learning not to be complacent and learning not to complain. Because a lot of times we talk ourselves out of the blessings of God because we're so busy looking in the eye of the natural. Let me just encourage you. God is a God who cannot lie. Those things that he promised to you in his word are yours for the taking. If you have things in your life that don't line up with the word of God, you got stuff happening in your body that, you know, clearly the word of God says doesn't have to happen. Don't let a bad diagnosis or a bad feeling or a bad this or what someone said or how it looks stop you and make that more real than what God says. If he said it in his word, he will honor. So I want to encourage you to be faithful and be obedient and trust God. Learn not to get depressed by what you see. Put on the eyes of faith and know that everything is going to be all right. Hope you enjoyed today's podcast. I want to encourage you to subscribe and share with your friends and family. If this ministry is being a blessing to you, I'm going to ask you to pray and consider partnering with us. Help support us so that we can take the good news of the gospel of Christ to more and more places in this world in this last day. I want to thank you for tuning in. As always, I'm MiChelle Ferguson, encouraging you to follow God in all of your endeavors and also to discover, develop, and celebrate who God has created you to be. See you next time.